All right, so welcome to America's Heroes Group, our digital live stream digital media show. This is Sean Claiborne, Army National Guard veteran. Today is Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. We're actually recording this on Sunday, the day before Veterans Day. So happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. And then also what we want to talk about is this is an important month in November because it is Military Family Appreciation Month, National Family Caregiver Month, and also Prostate Cancer and Alzheimer's Awareness Month. Very big things happening to get you to think about those important topics, particularly military family appreciation, because military families go through a lot with their veterans. And also, people don't really realize that when a person gets deployed, it's not just the person, it's really the family that has to go through that experience. So that's something we want to think about and talk about when we talk about veterans and things like that. So once again, we have Stephanie Kalota with us. Of course, Stephanie Kalota is the creator and founder of the Veterans Legislative Voice. Now, she is going to talk about some important things when it came to these election results we just witnessed not too long ago. This is about a week ago. And now President Trump is the president-elect once again. He's going to be sitting in the White House as commander-in-chief and also as the president of the United States. How you doing, Stephanie?
Doing all right. Living day to day, watching all this data come in. And it's quite interesting to figure all of that stuff out.
So what are your thoughts right now about how Trump won? What are your concerns about his policies? We just had a conversation earlier over the pond with a great conversation. We talked about how that might shape how Donald Trump's policies may shape geopolitical events. But what are your thoughts on what's going to happen domestically, particularly with veterans care?
Well, it's I say we'll see when we see it come, because we did find out a lot of information when Project 2025 came out. And for those that there's very few people that have not heard of Project 2025 yet, but that came from the Heritage Foundation. A lot of people are skeptical of it because President Trump said, "Oh, I don't know who wrote this. I don't know anything about this." Okay. Heritage Foundation has been writing this recommendation policy book since Ronald Reagan. And they've been writing it for every conservative presidential candidate every election timeframe. Mm-hmm. And so it's something they do every couple of years. And many conservative presidents have used it. And actually, when President Trump's first term, he actually enacted 2/3 of the recommendations of the Heritage Foundation's policy book for that one. And it's quite interesting when he says he doesn't know these people, because many of them worked for him, especially the ones that headed up the writing of it and pretty much the big masterminds of it. And he even said last month that he plans to hire one of the guys that actually was the main author. Interesting. But the thing is that there has been a lot of backlash on Project 2025. A lot of people have pointed out that some of the stuff will not work. It will actually cause a lot of issues, make things very ineffective and inefficient. And I actually have a feeling that there's people in the Heritage Foundation that's actually hearing this. And I'm hoping that they actually try to fix it, or at least try to make what their policies recommendations better. Because that's what I would do if I wrote a recommendations book, and then I hear a bunch of people point out a lot of the issues that they see. I would want to try to figure out and work out the problems and figure out how it could actually work better. So that's what I'm hoping is going to happen. I'm going to try to be more of an optimistic person when it comes to the future for that. Also, they've heard a lot of people have had their say on how much they don't like the recommendations. So there's possibilities that Trump might not do some of those. We'll see. So it's a little bit up in the air, because these recommendation books, this is the first time they've really made it this big. And I mean, people have written podcasts over them. There's been series over it now. It's been pretty wild at how much this affected. So it could, we got to try to see what steps they may take because of the backlash it actually enacted. So we'll see. I'm sorry, I had to do a brief overview over that for people that are not familiar. There's a few things in the book, at least for veterans, that would really affect them. And one of them would be a minimum requirement of primary care doctors, specifically, and other providers to actually see at least 19 patients a day. Right now, they can see as few as 6. And that's, I mean, a lot of patients have multiple complicated things, especially veterans, because our health is often a lot more complicated than a regular civilian. We actually are there's more veterans that are actually on full disability. There's actually an outlier of them on disability, and it doesn't match up with the civilians. They're more likely to be on disability too. So they got more complicated medical issues. They might need more time. So seeing 19 patients can cause a lot of issues. Veterans may not be able to get seen for all the issues that they need in one appointment. Quality control can drop heavily. Physicians might not be able to actually put in all of the notes in the medical records that they actually go through, and may forget to send referrals. Now, how would that really affect the veteran, though, other than, medical records? Well, every couple of years, a veteran goes through a evaluation for their current VA disability ratings, for what they have service connected, and then what their rating is. And they go by the medical records to make sure what's the current issue of their condition. How is that condition currently affecting them? Because if it's worse, the rating might go up. If it's better, the rating will go down. If it looks like there's no notes in it in the medical records, then they're going to assume it's all good. Or, they might put in an error, say that they don't have an issue with it. And so so people could actually see their VA disability drop. I've had those issues before that a doctor, they saw, I think at that time, those doctors, primary care doctors, I think they were between 9 and 12 a day for the clinic that I was at. And he still missed a few things and said, nope, not having issue with this. No, none of this. And I'm like, no, I checked my medical records to make sure that he was actually putting it in correctly, sent him a message. I'm like, you need to fix this because this is incorrect. And he did. And that's what I recommend for veterans too, is to send a secure message, because actually the Veterans Benefit Administration can actually see the secure messaging when they pull your file, your claims file, when they do evaluations. So FYI, people send secure messages. There's a record of that, and they can see that.
Now, how do they send it secure? Do they just type secure inside the subject line, or how do they do that?
Oh no, it's under the My Healthy Vet system. There's a website for veterans, and it's called My Healthy Vet. There's secure messages that you can send to any doctor that really is assigned to you. It gets pre-programmed to your actual profile on what clinics you go to, things like that, where you get it referred to. So like, I see an oncologist for my breast cancer risk. I can send a secure message to my oncologist, an update for something. And no one else can read it other than the oncologist and I, and probably the nurses. But then also the Veterans Benefit Administration can see that, so that they could be on top of what my rating should be for if I do get breast cancer. They could actually check that. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things that really does help out a lot. My Healthy Vet's really great. And there's a lot of great things to it other than just the messaging, because you can refill prescriptions, you can see your medical records, all that jazz.
Wow. So what are some of the things did you see anything that you saw in Trump's, because prior to 2025, people have to understand too, granted, and it was this particular one was written specifically for a Donald Trump presidency. They've been clear about that. They kind of they've basically said this is a basic give him a to-do list of what he needs to be doing when he becomes president. However, Trump's party platform didn't necessarily always align 100% with Project 2025 as a document. There are certain things that I saw in the some of his tax proposals that look, like he's focusing on small business and trying to help small business get off the ground. Whereas Kamala Harris's plan was more focused on families and trying to get, particularly like children, money for kids through the tax code. The big thing.
Kamala Harris had a startup business tax rebate, I believe $50,000, because I think it was $5,000.
Yeah.
So she did have one for small businesses too.
Yeah, but I think like the focus was more, like, even though she had certain things for small businesses, but in the practical sense, it was morely focused on families and getting tax credits to like that to the middle class and for basically help grow families and help them, help support families. Whereas Donald Trump was less focused on families and more focused on, business owners and small business owners and things like that. Less credits, but more tax incentives for doing things to create a business and all kind of stuff. The thing that when you look at both of those types of plans when it comes to veterans benefits, what do you think Trump is more likely to do? Because one thing Trump is known for is changing stuff, or you'll make promises and then not carry them through, or promise, this is going to happen, but it doesn't necessarily work that way because it may not even be possible given how the math really works.
It really depends on who works for him. And I'll say that because those that work for him, those people in the past that have worked for him in the past and worked for other Republicans, especially in Congress, they have looked into studies and ordered studies for different things. And that kind of gives you an idea of where their focus is. Because, of course, a lot of Republicans, their focus is trying to cut costs, cut funding, lower funding, things like that. So then you can cut taxes because you want to lower the funding, cut the taxes so that you don't have to pay as much of the funding. Because it doesn't make sense if you increase the funding for things, but then you cut taxes because you're going to get a deficit. So those types of things do happen. A few of the people that have worked in and around Trump before and also on Project 2025 have proposed studies and also talked about actually removing or doing away with total disability, individual unemployability. And those are for people that have a rating that does not add up to 100%, but their disabilities are so great that they cannot work. So the VA pays them at 100%. And those people do qualify for Social Security majority of the time. If they have enough credits, all of that stuff, they would also qualify for Social Security. Well, they're saying, well, they have the Social Security then. So why do they need TDIU? That's the problem that is kind of scary for a lot of people, because if you take those two individual numbers, a lot of times they're not very livable, especially for an individual veteran in a lot of locations. They can't live on, I think it's $3,500 a month right now for TDIU in certain areas. I can't imagine trying to live on that in Chicago or LA because the amount for housing and cost of living and things like that. I know many veterans that don't qualify for Social Security, but they do have the TDIU. They often move out to rural areas because it is cheaper. But the problem with that is that the healthcare is not as great. So it's one of those give and takes. Do you want to get your healthcare, straightened out and then barely live? Or do you go to a rural area that you can at least live a little bit better, but then your healthcare can be pretty sketchy because you might have to drive a long way. I mean, there's a mentor of mine that actually she drives 4 to 6 hours for her doctor's appointments and tries to line them up all in the same day because she lives a really far away in a rural area. And so it can cause some additional issues there. That part is a little scary for a lot of veterans. Another one is it is in the Project 2025. That's kind of deep in there that a lot of people have not really mentioned or talked about. And it's one that actually says that they need to focus on making service connections for conditions that are directly, and I'm putting this in all caps, directly tied to service, i.e. an injury. You were hit by a Humvee. And so those conditions, residual conditions that are permanent, you basically would get service connection and rating for VA disability. Right now, the VA honors any condition that majority of conditions that are diagnosed while you're in service, because a lot of times you don't know what could really be caused by service, especially if things are like toxic exposures. If you have an immediate reaction to something that was there, that's going to cause issues. So if you're exposed to a lot of fuel, and especially if you're drenched with it, it's going to cause breathing issues. It's going to cause skin issues. There's a lot of things there. So there's other stuff that can cause conditions that is not as blatant as getting hit by a Humvee. Mm. So that might be the scary thing that happens for people, because people will be diagnosed with asthma while they're in the service. And that could be because of their exposure to fuel. It could be a lot of other things. It could also just be congenital and it got diagnosed at the time frame. But we don't know. Mm-hmm. But the VA gives you the benefit of the doubt. The benefit of the doubt is supposed to be on the veteran, and that is in CFR 38 on the Code of Federal Regulations. So to me, if they want to do that, they have to amend the Code of Federal Regulations 38, which should take legislative action. We will see how that works out, because it looks like there's a very thin margin in both the Senate and the House. And I can see that causing a standstill when it comes to funding, and might actually cause a government shutdown. Because that's something I know quite a few legislators that are veterans would call that out, and then start a press conference in the front of the Capitol.
Wow. Yeah, and I can see that really running against the PACT Act. If they kind of tie back, the service-connected illnesses to actual time in service, as opposed to the presumptives that have been expanded for people that have Agent Orange exposure, and then the toxic chemicals, toxic exposure from burn pits, things like that. Because that pretty much almost unwinds the PACT Act. Just by if you tie it back in, connecting military service, then the PACT Act, it can basically becomes undone, and there is no presumed coverage because you were presumed to be exposed, which could have devastating effects. But I can see a target being on the idea, because right now veterans can get disability from the VA, and they can also get disability from Social Security at the same time, which makes a decent living wage depending on how much you paid into, whether you're getting SSDI or if you're getting regular SSI. So, I mean, those types of things, I think, that they're trying to cut money, because they're obviously, with Project 2025, with the Republican Party in general, the idea is always to shrink government. And if you starve off the amount of revenue coming into the government, because the idea now is that you can, Trump's idea is that you can pay for all this stuff. This is not in Project 2025, but the idea in Donald Trump's tax plan is that he can just pay for everything through tariffs. All we got to do is raise tariffs and now make everything go away. We can make the Chinese pay for all this stuff, and the Europeans pay for all this stuff through tariffs on goods coming into the country, which actually causes inflation, does not help inflation. The people didn't realize that. Talk to an economist. I mean, don't take my word for it.
Well, it's just like the wall. He said Mexico is going to pay for the wall, and then they ended up taking the funding actually from the government, from the military, to pay for the wall for the small, tiny amount that they actually built it.
And gave it to one of his buddy contractors. One of his buddy contractors actually got one of the contract jobs to do a lot of the work.
Yes. So. Yeah, and it's quite interesting when you go there and into that aspect. I can really see that becoming legal as well, and going to the Supreme Court at least, or in the district courts, because some people may not know, VA disability actually can go up to the district courts and higher. So there's things that could, if his policies go against the actual Code of Federal Regulations, it can cause a lot of conflict, and I could see legal things happen. It might take a few years. It might take till the end of his administration, because it is a really slow road to go through that process, but it may get there because it is very conflicting. Oh my goodness. I know you had mentioned something else and I completely forgot what it was, and I'm so sorry. That's no problem.
But the thing of Project 2025 that kind of I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a minute. Once I get on my soapbox, because this is, I think, it's something that's really important that I get irritated by.
Yes.
Is that, we have in our politics, it's not just the Republicans, it's Democrats also get caught up into ideology as opposed to what actually works. When I look at the tax plans, for example, Kamala Harris had a lot of great things in her tax plan. Donald Trump actually had some good things in his tax plan, but they also had some flaws. Donald Trump has a fatal flaw, which is that thing I mentioned about tariffs. You cannot pay for a government on tariffs.
Yes.
Once upon a time, there was no income tax on the American public, but back in the 1800s, but we had a weak military. We didn't have Social Security.
Nope.
There was no disability. We didn't have all the government departments and agencies that we have today.
Yeah.
You'd have to literally shrink the government down to literally nothing, bare bones, if that's your real plan. And in the global economy that we have today, this doesn't work anyway. It's not practical.
No. Well, that's what reminded me, actually, you mentioned Social Security. So when you're in the military, you do get BAH. You get a few other things while you're in, and which actually helps, help you pay everything out, and you have a decent living with that. Well, Social Security only analyzes the taxable wage, and they take that into effect. So you only get the federal income tax on your taxable wage, not your BAH and everything else. So your actual income through those years while you're in the military is actually a lot lower than you thought. So that can actually add up to a much lower amount of the monthly payment for the Social Security. You got to look at the math when you do that, and when that's one thing that many people don't realize. When you're so high up in Congress and working in those staff areas, you don't realize that an average veteran for Social Security can actually get a really low amount of Social Security wage. And what was it for some people? I think the average was around between $1,400 and $1,700 a month.
Wow.
For Social Security that I've seen actually given. This is before COVID, when I was working at the VA disability law firm that also did Social Security. So prior to COVID, before the cost of living. And it's pretty scary on trying to live on that wage alone, because that's how much rent is now in at least the South.
And really, the Social Security system in a way kind of unfortunately, punishes people that don't have jobs that pay a lot of money. Because honestly, now being honest, I've probably already maxed out my Social Security limits just by work history, and I'm not even close to retirement age. But for some people that have worked, they've worked 10, 15 years longer than me, they're not, because Social Security, so people understand, the last 35 years of your employment history is what they base it off of for Social Security. So your last 35 years of employment, they take the highest 35, your top 35 years, and they factor that out, and that's what gives you your paycheck. So if you're working at McDonald's for 30 years or whatever, that's the example.
Or under the table, you're screwed.
Yeah, exactly. So working on Wall Street, it's a totally different, Social Security benefit you're going to get. So for some people, it's nearly impossible to live off Social Security because they never really paid that much into it. So whereas other people, because they had higher incomes, it does get paid into it. And that's one disparity that's never been addressed by either party. Nobody ever talks about that, and I'm trying to fix that in some kind of way. It's such a touchy subject or whatever.
It is.
One of the things that was mentioned in Project 2025 was the privatization possibly of Social Security. So turning Social Security into something like, for example, a Medicare supplement plan, where possibly in the future you might see a situation where the government just washes their hands of Social Security payments altogether and says, okay, you can go to BlackRock or Fidelity or Vanguard and let them put money have them take money out of your paycheck or whatever, or however you fund it, and that becomes your Social Security benefit based on, and you'll have choices, because choices is always the key thing that they use often to get you to switch into something that's guaranteed versus something that's maybe. They usually offer you choices. You have the choice of how you want to invest your money. You can choose whether or not you want to do it this way or that or whatever, but it's a not guaranteed thing. So if you don't know what you're doing, you can end up, once again, being worse off than if you had the guaranteed Social Security check. But if you know what you're doing, maybe come out ahead and actually make some money and even pass on some generational wealth to future generations. Once again, nobody really talks about those things. It goes into those details as to how those things actually work in real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's privatization does scare me. There is an encouragement of more I can't even say that word very well, but there is more of a conversion of actually seeing sending more veterans out into the community, called community care. Mm-hmm. And there is a push on actually privatizing the VA, which can be scary because there are providers that providers that work for the VA, they're required to go through the mandatory classes. You're able to be more standardized on the quality of work. You have a much easier way to touch them and reach them and work with them to treat our veterans. They also, it's a lot more streamlined. It's very scary on the thought of actually sending anything out on the community for certain things. I've used community care, and some of them are really great, especially for acupuncture, massage therapy, pain management. They're great, but then a lot of them have issues actually checking out your medical records. And it can cause some issues when those things happen. So it's often just a lot better to keep it where it is within the VA, because those doctors are more likely to see all the documents that you have in your records, make sure that your health is at the best it should be, and it could be really helpful.
It seems like, to me, like, because the way I understand community care, because I don't qualify for VA benefits. I can't use a VA healthcare system, whatever, because I didn't have 6 months of deployment or active duty through my 8 years of service. Because when you're reserve duty, that's not considered the same thing. So people can understand it's not the same thing as being active duty when you're in reserve duty. So even though I have 6 years of service, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years of inactive service, it still doesn't equate to 6 months of continuous or of actual of active duty. Now, when you have so when you're going through community care, from my perspective, having not touched it,